I was so excited to read this book that I'm reviewing for you guys today. The title is pure poetry. The critical reception was great. The premise of the book was great. It's a debut novel. I love debut novels. Debut novels are like debut albums, and they have so much potential, and they feel so different. When you finish a debut novel that unravels you, it's totally different than a novel that unravels you by a well-known author. It's something different about it. Plus, you get to say, after you've read it, it was amazing, and it was her effing debut novel. You get that extra punch of acclamation that you get to throw at it. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. That's the book that we're talking about today. A debut novel that disappointed me. It was a weird disappointment. It was like the potential for disappointment just grew and grew. What I mean is the first 50 to 100 pages, for the first 50 pages for sure, I had a lump in my throat the entire time. You're just pulsating and aching with the main character, Kaya. The book opens with her being abandoned by her mother. Her older siblings end up abandoning her, and she's left alone with her abusive alcoholic father, living in poverty and just trying to survive. The lump in your throat will stay there through the first 100 pages easily. You will be praising Delia Owens. Cast your dancing spell my way, I promise to go under it. Except it's not an effing dancing spell. It's a lump in your throat spell. It's a aching with Kaya through her inner psychological processing of her pain and trauma as a child spell. It cuts, you know? It cuts into that fleshy part of your soul. Delia Owens absolutely crushes the first 100 pages of this novel. I mean, I was gearing up to buy in bulk and send copies out to everyone in the frickin' phone book. It was pure sorcery. It was lyrical. It was a regional book, which I love. Delia Owens gives us the region of coastal North Carolina marshlands exquisitely. Mwah. Not to mention, she attempts a daring maneuver with this book, and she pulls it off really well. The first page, even before chapter 1, Owens gives us the name of the character that is going to be murdered. So we start out with that. And then the rest of the novel, you're in this time structure of going back and forth between these multiple decades as they move towards one another and finally merge into the novel's present time. And she does this maneuver masterfully, like a frickin' gymnast doing a triple ripple dipple move and landing on her feet and sticking it to the frickin' mat. So if you're just joining us, we've already established that Delia Owens is a sorceress and a gymnast, which is a pretty common combination to see in a modern novelist. But Zim, why are you saying the book was a disappointment? It sounds like you loved it. Cast your dancing spell my way, I promise to go under it. Here's the thing. The first 100 pages are so masterfully crafted, like frickin' lobster mac and cheese, or the pickle beer I had the other day that was exquisite. I mean, it was really, really wonderful. But where I think Owens, the sorceress, gymnast, lobster chef, master brewer, novelist, really starts to weaken in Where the Crawdads Sing is as she ages the main character, Kaya. And as she brings Kaya into her teenage years and into romance. I think that what happens is we have this dynamic child in the first 100 pages that has the trauma of her experience, the trauma of her abandonment, but also the childlike wonder and the curiosity and the hopeful element of hoping that her family hasn't gone for good, and then the way she's surviving and falling in love with her surroundings, but also living out of her trauma. There's so much dynamic complexity going on with Kaya in the beginning, but I think as Owens ages her, she sheds a lot of those complex elements. She begins to shed them like feathers, like a molting parrot. And it's not just that she's shedding elements, because that naturally has to happen. It feels like she's shedding the most important elements of Kaya, the most dynamic, important elements of the main character. And all the while asking us to suspend our belief just a little too much. It feels like the plot is driving the story instead of telling the stories of these characters. The story begins to take on like too much of a predictable, flat, easy tone and voice. We see Kaya become the town outcast marsh girl, which is totally believable. I mean, she figured out how to survive out on her own in the marshlands, away from the town and away from human interaction. But at the same time, it's like then she suddenly becomes an expert on the marshlands, and she's living in this very isolated environment, but then also all the men desire her, and it just sort of like boils down into this fantasy or something. It feels like at times that Owens is just taking shortcuts, like it's just shortcuts to the plot, instead of dignifying Kaya and her story and her trauma and letting us walk with her through her coping and her inner processing and psychological journey. There's shortcuts that are taken, and we see Kaya go from 6-year-old abandoned marsh girl to marsh expert marsh girl with not a ton of impact from the trauma. Though there is some sprinkled in there, it's not what you expect, and it's not enough to be realistic. The marshlands become her therapy, which I think had a lot of beautiful potential, but it comes too easy. It's like she's abandoned and then the marshlands are enough for her. It's too simplistic to boil it down to that, but that's the overall feeling that you get with Kaya, the main character, the character that you are invested in with a lump in your throat for the first 100 pages. And then we're taken on this journey of romance, and there's not a lot of pain left over from her trauma because the marshlands heal her, and now Kaya is an expert on the marshlands and so desirable by all the men, but also the town outcast. It's all like a weird mystery bag at Halloween or something. And then later the courtroom scenes are like just terrible. They're terrible. They're rushed. They're unbelievable. It just felt so cheapened. It felt like someone like drank some of your whiskey and then added water back to it so that you didn't know. I think what happened is Delia Owens had this great idea for a plot line and this great idea of a time structure that she abandons. She surrenders the development of her characters to the plot. Like, she had to make it work. She had to fill in the gaps with this. She had to trim and taper off here. She had to, in order to make this idea of a plot line work, she had to bend her characters and sacrifice elements of their realism to enable the plot line to work succinctly and to be possible. And that seems to be what she focused on, was making the plot line work. What I would have loved to see is Owens let the characters drive the plot. The story of the characters that surfaces as she writes them and as she explores the realistic impact that trauma like Kaya experiences would have on a person, and that would dictate and inform the movement of the story instead of the other way around, where the characters are bending to the plot. You novelists out there listening, don't do that. The readers don't want just plot. They want characters that they see themselves in. And plot is great. Plot has to happen. Plot has to exist, and it has to be good. But the characters have to be king. You have to dignify not just your reader, but the character themselves, even if they are a fictitious character. Now, I don't doubt that Delia Owens wasn't invested in Kaya, but I think she really liked her plot line and her idea, so much so that she trimmed and tapered here and there with Kaya, and she made Kaya bend to the plot. And at the end of the day, the stories that become masterpieces and classics are the ones with characters that strike us. Was Where the Crawdads Sing terrible? No, it wasn't terrible. I was disappointed. It just disappointed me. I probably won't ever read it again. I feel like it didn't live up to its potential. I feel like Owens cut corners and sacrificed her characters to plot and mystery. There, I said it. I wanted to really feel the journey of Kaya. I wanted to feel her trauma. I wanted to feel that lump in my throat that she promises us in the first 100 pages is going to carry us through the story. I read the book in a weekend, 2 days. And I kept reading because it was interesting. I wanted to know what happened. But the masterpiece that I thought I was reading in the first 100 pages was surrendered to a dime store paperback. And that left me frustrated. Go as far as you can. Way out yonder where the crawdads sing, Tate said. Just means far in the bush where critters are wild, still behaving like critters. Owens should have left her characters far out in the bush where they could be human and still behave like humans. It was humanity that I was aching for in this novel. And it was transformed by the same sorceress that cast her lump in the throat spell on me in the first 100 pages and promised me humanity throughout. The sorceress that set up a masterpiece and then delivered a paperback novel flatline. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. It won't be a classic. In the famous words of Billy Joel, it'll be put in the back on the discount rack like another can of beans.